All right, welcome to A Growing Concern. As you can see what we're going to talk about tonight, but first I just want to make a note of it that I started doing this program in October of 1998. So we've been out here every week trying to bring education and information to folks on different issues. And tonight we're going to talk about, as I promised here in the last couple of weeks, we're going to start talking about the measures. Tonight is going to be Yes on 91, and I have the Chief Petitioner with me here, Anthony Johnson, who has been in the trenches with this issue for a while, and we're going to talk about this for about a half an hour, and then we're going to move on to something else. Hopefully Paul Stanford's going to join us at the half-hour mark. He's got something he wants to share with folks as well. He's got his show starting at 8 o'clock, so we all know that there's a double hitter here every Friday night. So welcome to the program, Anthony.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be on.
All right, it was just kind of a spur-of-the-moment thing that I bumped into Anthony here, and it's good because he's the one that's been putting this particular, as I show here, 36 pages up on the ballot. You didn't write it yourself. I know that Paul Loney, a local lawyer, and a couple other folks did the writing, and they did a pretty good job. I've been through all 36 pages, and I wanted to make sure that it didn't mess with the medical marijuana. And that is something that probably is first in your mind as well.
For certain. This measure was written by quite a few attorneys, quite a few activists and advocates, local and national, and everyone believes in the medical marijuana program. And so one of the big themes was not impacting the medical marijuana program whatsoever. So we make sure to mention that actually 3 times in the measure.
I think I underlined that.
Once that it will not amend or affect the medical marijuana program in any way, and the rules and regulations that come out of this regulatory system for adults over the age of 21 cannot impact the medical marijuana program either. And additionally, with the help of attorneys like Paul Loney and Leland Berger, who have been at this for a long time protecting the rights of the cannabis community, we made sure that no criminal penalties were made any worse. So we either kept penalties the same. For instance, the laws for people under the age of 21 remained the same, but nothing was made any worse.
That did concern some people, that people under 21 were affected, and then we found out that it didn't change what already existed. It didn't make things any worse.
Correct.
And that's always good to know. But my main concern when I heard about that this was going to be on the ballot was, it just seems to me it passed in Washington, obviously, and it just seems to me that Olympia up there, like or Salem here, they went after to change the medical marijuana and make it worse. Cut the amount that a medical marijuana patient could have. Now, is there a possibility that could happen in Salem?
Yeah, first let me talk about Washington a little bit. We have a really different situation than in Washington. The Oregon medical marijuana program is regulated. State, patients get a license from the state, registered with the state. They have their state card. The medical marijuana facilities are registered with the state. They get a state license. They pay a state licensing fee. In Washington, the medical marijuana program is not regulated. The medical marijuana dispensaries that are operating in Washington are not regulated by the state. They're not licensed by the state. And patients in Washington are not licensed by the state. There is no Washington State medical marijuana card. We know in Oregon there are just under 65,000 patients. We know in Colorado there's about 240,000 medical marijuana patients. If you try to figure out how many patients there are in Washington, nobody knows, because you don't have to register with the state. You just need your medical professional's recommendation, and it's much easier to get a medical marijuana card in Washington. There are more conditions and more healthcare professionals to get a card. So in Oregon, we have a much more regulated system. So in Washington, there's no regulatory body protecting the medical marijuana program. Where here in Oregon, we have the Oregon Health Authority in many ways protects the medical marijuana program, the licensing fees that patients pay, as well as the dispensary fees that are paid, generate millions of dollars for the state of Oregon. And that in many ways protects the medical marijuana program. Now, I know many people are afraid of change and what may happen to the medical marijuana program. And even in Washington, the fact that they have an unregulated medical marijuana system and no state agency to protect that medical marijuana system, the medical marijuana program in Washington is still intact. There has been legislation proposed, but nothing has actually passed. And that's going to happen. And that's likely to happen in Oregon. That's likely, well, I won't even say likely. That is going to happen in Oregon whether Measure 91 passes or not. There are opponents of medical marijuana, prohibitionists, law enforcement groups, pharmaceutical companies, treatment facilities that do not support the medical marijuana program. Every year they introduce legislation to roll back and hurt the medical marijuana program. I have been working to protect and improve the medical marijuana program and marijuana law since I moved to Oregon, really since really in 2005, the first legislative session, and there are always bills that are working to hurt the medical marijuana program. If Measure 91 passes, the marijuana movement, the cannabis community, we're going to be in a much stronger position to protect and improve the medical marijuana program, because we'll just have won an election that has garnered over 50% of the vote in an off year, and a campaign that's raised over $1 million, if not over $2 million. And the legislators are going to be highly unlikely to go after anything that goes against the will of the voters. And one of the things that the voters have voted upon is to not affect or amend the medical marijuana program in any way. And I will definitely be there, along with everyone else that helped write Measure 91, to help protect the medical marijuana program.
Sure, I can see that. And on the conservative side, there's always the law and order that say marijuana is bad and all that. But those same conservatives are also fiscal conservatives, and there will be money coming into the state because of this.
Definitely. I believe that Measure 91, regulating marijuana in general, is actually both a conservative and liberal idea. It's liberal in the fact that it's compassionate, and you don't want to harm somebody for doing something that doesn't harm anybody else. At the same time, it's very conservative in that it's personal freedom, personal responsibility, saving police resources, smaller government. I mean, what's a bigger example of bigger government than armed agents of the state arresting, inciting, and taking away people's freedom for doing something that doesn't harm anybody else, for doing something that is less addictive and less toxic than tobacco and alcohol.
Sure.
And Measure 91 has been, I think the libertarians all across the state definitely endorse this measure. The Cascade Policy Institute, which is a libertarian think tank, has endorsed this measure, and I think you'll play it tonight. Pete Tutmark, who's a registered Republican, who is a 33-year veteran of law enforcement agencies here in Oregon, including the Clackamas County Sheriff's Department, he's endorsed the measure. Former Oregon State Supreme Court Justice William Riggs has endorsed the measure. The former federal prosecutor under the Clinton administration, the chief federal prosecutor in Oregon, has endorsed the measure. The former director of the Addictions and Mental Health Services Division of Oregon has endorsed this measure. So we have people definitely on the liberal side, definitely on the more conservative side, but people all across the state, all across demographics that support this measure.
That flies in the face of what a lot of people say. I've been hearing that we need to hold off on this and study what happens in Washington and what happens in Colorado. And it sounds to me like we already got our ducks in a row here.
The Cannabis Tax Act was passed. The Marijuana Tax Act was passed in 1937, and we've had decades upon decades of a war on marijuana that has not achieved any of its goals. It's not hard to get marijuana in the state of Oregon, and we're wasting a bunch of money, and we are wasting law enforcement resources that would be better spent looking for missing children, solving unsolved rape and murder cases, responding to 911 calls in Josephine County, which right now, if you live in Josephine County and you call the cops at 2 in the morning because somebody's breaking into your house, there's no law enforcement to come help you. And to me, that's just a travesty in this day and age. And by passing Measure 91, 10,000 arrests and citations go away immediately. That's a massive amount of police hours that are now free to go after serious and violent criminals. And by waiting and seeing for 2 years, 4 more years, that's thousands upon thousands of people that are being arrested and cited, that we're wasting those law enforcement resources, that we're negatively impacting those people's lives, and we're not generating the revenue that we can generate, that the state has projected to be up to $40 million a year the first year this program gets off the ground. That'll fund education, public safety, mental health, drug treatment services, services. So I would say we cannot afford to wait. And we've learned a lot from Colorado and Washington, and we'll continue to learn more.
Yeah, not to mention freeing up the court docket for some of these other criminals that they'll have time to go after.
Yeah, definitely. It'll free up judicial resources, law enforcement resources, and it'll create jobs, generate revenue for the state. I mean, to me, it's a policy whose time has come.
Well, I've seen some programs on marijuana, the killer weed on different channels on TV, and this war on drugs hasn't achieved any of its professed goals, but there was a lot of other goals, like social engineering goals, that were underneath the surface of it all, and filling up the jails so some of these prisons can get their money from the government and all that. There's been some goals that have worked out very well, but it hasn't been in the people's favor, it seems like.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think any policymaker, politician in office, they're going to say, what do you want to do with our drug laws? You want less people using harmful drugs, you want less fatalities, you want less traffic problems on the road, crashes, fatalities in general, and you want to keep drugs out of the hands of kids. And the war on marijuana has not accomplished any of those goals.
Right.
Surveys all across the country show that many, if not a majority in a lot of places, of teens find it easier to get marijuana than alcohol and cigarettes. And we've seen a drastic decrease in the use of tobacco amongst teens. We didn't have to criminalize adult use of tobacco to decrease teen use. You tax it, you regulate it, and you educate people about the truth. You don't blow things out of proportion. You definitely don't lump things that are less harmful and addictive than tobacco and alcohol. You don't lump those things in a legal category with meth and heroin and harmful drugs like that. You do that, kids know better, and then they try marijuana, and they're like, well, what else have they been lying to me about? We need to tell the truth about marijuana. We do need to tell the truth that kids need to wait until their brains are developed.
Sure.
But they need to know the truth about marijuana, and we need to end this reefer madness that we've been living in for far too long.
Yeah, I read that Anslinger was doing it just to gain a little bit of power, and he found that was a way to do it. And a lot of it was very racist, how they professed that we needed to stop this because the Mexicans were coming across the border, and all the black jazz singers and all that whole thing. It was very racist, and that thing, it's been what, 80 years now, and it's incredible. They managed to get rid of the prohibition of alcohol within a decade, I think, something like that.
And the racist implications of the war on marijuana are still with us today. In Oregon, if you're black, you are 100% more likely to be arrested or cited for marijuana than if you're not. And if you live in Lane County, that number is actually about 3.5%, if not 4%, four times as likely. And, across the country, it's even worse. Oregon actually is one of the better states as far as racial disparity, but still, it's 100% more likely if you're someone of color to be arrested or cited for marijuana. And we have, so many more African American men in prison, and I believe, in prison, parole, somewhere in the criminal justice system. You compare that to how many people we're putting through college, I think our priorities are really out of whack.
Right, and I think, there are 100% more chance of getting whatever arrested or whatever for marijuana, but their sentences are a lot worse too.
That tends to play out. That people of color are definitely more likely to get sentenced to jail for the same crime.
Sure.
So that's why I got involved in this issue. And back at the University of Missouri, I saw my African American friends treated more harshly than my white friends, even though I actually had an encounter with my white friends were drinking underage, had more marijuana, had marijuana paraphernalia, and they were treated less harshly than a black friend who had some marijuana on him, but he had less marijuana, no alcohol, no paraphernalia on him, and he was actually treated more harshly. And that's why I became an activist. To me, it's all about ending arrests and citations of people who don't need their freedom taken away, be it for a ticket, be it for an arrest, be it for jail time or probation. Those arrests and citations can have lifelong effects on people, even if it's just a ticket. It's a very expensive ticket, for one, and two, that criminal background check can follow you the rest of your life.
Yeah, I'm glad we're taking this tack to it too, because it isn't just to legalize something to notice that people can get high, and there's nothing wrong with that, because those BATF people you mentioned that would break into someone's home possibly and arrest them for smoking weed are going to go home and drink a six-pack. So there's a lot of incongruity and discrimination involved in this, and it's also a states' rights issue where this is what we want to do. We have a right to do it. It isn't just a simple fact that people want to liberate this particular substance and have every right in order to indulge in that if they so desire, if they're an adult.
Yeah, Measure 91 is really a pro-regulation, let's better prioritize our measure initiative. It's a proposal to bring marijuana out of the criminal element into a regulated market, very much like we do beer and wine. If people want to get marijuana in Oregon, it's widely available, but it's untested, unregulated, and we don't get the tax revenue that we can be getting to fund our schools, public safety, drug treatment, and drug prevention. So yeah, it's not about using marijuana, it's about regulating marijuana. I mean, the current system is a complete failure, and I think anybody can really see that when they look at it objectively.
Now you're talking about Oregon, but it's also the whole country is a failure.
Definitely, and Oregon is very important for moving this issue forward, really state by state. And we are likely to see California, Nevada, maybe New Mexico, Maine, Massachusetts, all on the ballot in 2016. All of those states are more likely to get passed, get funded, and have a better chance of winning if we win this in Oregon. So I encourage everybody to read the measure, vote yes on 91.com. You can sign up to volunteer, and make sure you get registered to vote by October 14th, and encourage your friends and family to get registered to vote and to get their ballots in. We have nearly 3 weeks to get your ballots in Oregon, and you definitely need to get registered by October 14th.
So that website you mentioned again was what?
Vote yes on 91.com.
Now can they click on a link and read this?
Yes, you can read the measure, you can see our endorsements, you can get statistics, you can sign up to help, but you definitely take a look for it. I think people that read the measure are much more likely to support it, and you can definitely see that it's a better policy than what we currently have.
Well, that's a low bar, though. That's a really low bar. Well, like I said, I went through about all 36 pages of this, and I'm not going to go through page by page because there's just so much. I mean, just definitions. You folks were really careful about making sure that things were defined, and that is really important because those can create loose ends under the enforcement aspects of a law like this, especially a law that flies in the face of whatever 80-90 years of habitual prosecution and persecution.
Yeah, definitely. This measure went through more than 50 drafts, several attorneys with eyes on it at numerous times, the Legislative Council's office, state legislators, even the governor's office provided input. We even got input from people who we knew were not going to support us just because we wanted to hear their concerns.
Sure.
And the best way we could address legitimate concerns. But I think we really have pulled many of the best aspects from Washington and Colorado. I think we've crafted a measure that has more reasonable taxation, more reasonable business structure, more freedom in many ways, and really strikes a great balance, taking the best from Colorado and Washington and forming a measure that will work great for Oregon.
I went through this twice, and the second time I went through it I was a little bit more careful, and I started paying attention to some details but I can't remember specifically a lot of the details, but a person would be allowed to grow like 4 plants and have a certain amount on them, and this is with some of those details. I think that since we haven't really seen anything on any of the media about this, it might be good to just talk a little bit about some of those details.
Definitely. So one of the basic concepts is to treat marijuana like the state does beer and wine, not like liquor, so we don't have state-run monopolies. They're going to regulate beer and wine same way they regulate our microbrew and local winery industries, like we do minimums or Rogue Brewery. And so in that, people can become a licensed producer, retailer, processor, regulated by the state, or you can cultivate your own marijuana, very similar how you can brew your own beer, make your own wine, and you're allowed 4 plants per household, and you're allowed to have 8 ounces per household.
Is that at the same time? 4 plants and 8 ounces?
4 plants and 8 ounces at any time at home. And those are reasonable limits for basically like a hobbyist grower. Like, again, this does not impact the medical marijuana program, so if you need those limits, you can still get a medical marijuana card and be under that system. But if you don't have a condition to get a medical marijuana card's expensive for you, or you don't need to be enrolled in the medical marijuana program necessarily, this is a way to save money and to grow 4 plants per household. And that was really important for us, and that we know people want to, many people out, the state projects anywhere between like 3 to 8% of marijuana consumers are going to want to grow their own marijuana. So for those people, it's ridiculous for somebody to grow 2 or 3 marijuana plants and be subject to a felony. That's not good use of resources for anyone. It's not, they're not harming anybody else. So we wanted to make a system set up that you could grow 4 plants, very similar to brewing your own beer.
Mm-hmm. Well, how about those folks that don't want to grow their own and they don't have a medical marijuana card? Are they going to be setting up? I know they made a big hullabaloo about the first one that was opening up over in Vancouver. There's going to be a government agency of some kind that's going to be setting up places, more or less dispensaries.
So the OLCC, the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, will regulate basically retail establishments, dispensaries, if you will, very similar to how they do bars and breweries. And we have, it's over 190 licensed and regulated medical marijuana facilities in the state already, regulated.
Just since March.
Yeah, regulated by the Oregon Health Authority. Yeah. Those facilities will be in great situation to serve both patients and adults over the age of 21, very similar to how it's worked out in Colorado. And I think in Colorado has been a great success where they've slashed marijuana arrests by 80%. They freed up law enforcement resources. Crime rate has not gone out of control. Highway fatalities have not increased. Teenage use has not increased. Actually, teens in Colorado, compared to the national average, now state that it's harder to get marijuana in Colorado than their peers in other states. And they've generated millions of dollars for the state. And Oregon will be in a situation to really follow in that path, to have licensed and regulated establishments that provide quality products that are tested, labeled correctly, child-proof containers, and we can best serve the public.
So from what you're saying then, I'm inferring that in Colorado it kind of tamped down the black market then.
Definitely. I believe in Colorado they suspect that 40% of the underground market moved into the regulated market almost immediately. The state and independent economic firm Econ Northwest projects the same thing to happen in Oregon as well. We're not promising that the underground market's going to go away immediately.
No, never.
It takes time, but basically, drug cartels who are polluting our state and national forests in Oregon,
big time.
And endangering hikers and campers that may stumble upon those grows. They are basically the Al Capone of today, and they're able to operate with impunity. By freeing up 10,000 arrests and citations every year, we have much more ability to go after major criminals and drug cartels, and over time we can we'll definitely eliminate a big chunk of the underground market immediately, and over time virtually eliminate it.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it reminded me when I was down visiting my parents down in Redding, California. There was 2 different articles in the same paper. One, they didn't say drug cartel, but it had to be because of the resources involved. 3,500 plants, and one was close to 9,000 plants. And like you said, the pollution from those, the use of water, and the pollution, and the killing of the local animals, wildlife, and all. These are a horrendous scourge on the area, and that stuff, that's a scourge on society, and it's tough on all of us. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because folks out there should realize that the how do you put it, regulate it, legalize it, and tax it, those are all in favor of society at large, not just a few portions of that society.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely benefit people that are in the cannabis community, growers, cultivators, and those that consume cannabis. But by freeing up resources, generating revenue, it'll be a good policy for the entire state of Oregon. An additional environmental benefit of Measure 91 is finally legalizing hemp in this state. Industrial hemp could have been legalized as early as 2009 through a bill that passed the Oregon State Legislature. But unfortunately, the Department of Agriculture has stated, if you look on their website now, where they talk about hemp, that they will not issue any licenses to farmers until the federal government changes its policy on hemp. Now, the federal government started to change policies a little bit, so the Department of Agriculture is starting to make moves and move in a better direction, but they haven't gone far enough yet. So Measure 91 will take us that next step, where Measure 91 removes federal barriers to issuing licenses to qualified hemp farmers. And so Measure 91 will legalize industrial hemp in Oregon, which will be another great product for the state of Oregon that has massive environmental benefits.
You got your talking points in order, because that was something I wanted to bring up and I totally forgot. Cannabis and hemp, even though it's the cannabis plant, are not the same thing, and the medicinal use of cannabis is one thing, and that's very important. But the textiles and the paper and all the different things that you can get from it would be a boon to farmers, and that is something that I was really glad to hear that it passed in Salem. I was wondering what happened to it. So it's as you say, it's just broke down because of the federal government's attitude towards it.
Yeah, completely. There are many things wrong with the war on marijuana and marijuana prohibition, and one of the most ridiculous things is prohibition of industrial hemp. The fact that Oregon citizens, residents can go to your local store, get hemp cereal, hemp soap, all kinds of products made of hemp, and Oregon farmers can't grow it. We got to buy it from China and Canada and send profits overseas. So it's a very important aspect of Measure 91 that doesn't get talked about very often. The media kind of wants to sensationalize things.
Sure.
Opponents of the measure definitely don't want to bring up industrial hemp, but industrial hemp has the potential to actually be a much bigger market and a much bigger boon to the state of Oregon's economy than even regulated marijuana.
I'm glad you mentioned the opponents, because we're running out of time here, and I did want to do some programming bringing in pro and con, and I got to looking around, and the folks that are against this are pretty much not really organized, and the only ones that are really against it are the usual law and order types, the slippery slope, the keep it away from the children, all those typical arguments that have been disproved for years now. Those folks are still out there, but there's really nothing else that I've seen.
Yeah, and those people with concerns about Measure 91, as far as the law and order, you say, all of their concerns are better tackled under a regulated market. If you want to do a better job of protecting children, then bring marijuana out of the criminal element into a regulated market. By moving marijuana or keeping marijuana in a criminal market, you're pushing kids to drug dealers who may have connections to the drug cartels, who may sell more harmful drugs that they want to push on the kids. If you look at highway fatalities, Colorado's highway fatalities, not that marijuana legalization necessarily caused it, but it definitely didn't cause an increase, and Measure 91 actually will provide more training for officers to keep our roads safe. And the gateway theory has been debunked many times, but the only way marijuana can be a gateway drug is if you push people into an unregulated market, criminal market, where a drug dealer could sell more harmful things. You move marijuana out of a criminal market into a regulated market, the gateway theory definitely goes away.
Isn't that what's kind of more or less happened, like in Amsterdam?
Yeah, if you look at Portugal, Netherlands, other countries, and even in medical marijuana states, you have seen the sky is falling speculation by prohibitionists have not played out. Highway fatalities have not increased. Use by kids have not increased. The more marijuana has been regulated, the more benefits we've seen for the state.
Reminds me of all the crying about the raising the minimum wage. Oh, it's going to ruin everything in all the states that it has. The economy goes up. I mean, it's don't cry. Pay attention to what's going on around you. Excuse me. Well, we're down about halfway. We've covered a lot in this. Before you leave us here, and I really appreciate you coming in and clarifying a lot of these issues in these 36 pages. And is there anything you might want to bring up that we didn't cover?
I think we covered a lot of it. I think that I encourage everyone to look at the current law and compare what's going on under the current law today and compare that to a regulated system that frees up law enforcement resources and generates revenue for our state. And I encourage everybody to check out VoteYesOn91.com.
All right, so that's that's the website, VoteYesOn91.com. I sure appreciate you coming in.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, this is great.